tonight, State of the Union. The name that will not appear, at least from Biden's mouth, Laken Riley, the University of Georgia nursing student who was murdered recently, allegedly at the hands of an illegal immigrant from Venezuela, who was released by the Biden administration into the country. For more on this, I want to bring in Bobby Burack, who is kind of covering the broad contours of all of this and noticing that Joe Biden has treated other deaths very differently. Bobby, from OUTKICK, good to have you with us, sir.
Vince, I appreciate it. Laken Riley is the political inverse of George Floyd. And you look at the reaction to it. Remember, in 2020, Joe Biden, Democrats, and his media allies, they saw George Floyd as a political opportunity. They used his singular death and portrayed it as an illustration of a wider issue in America, which is systemic racism in the police force, while never actually proving that his black skin color contributed to his death. But even 4 years later, we're still talking about George Floyd. Laken Riley, by contrast, is a political indictment on Joe Biden. She is the story that he wants to suppress, like he did the Hunter Biden laptop story was, because this is a young woman, 22-year-old nursing student, who died at the hands of an illegal immigrant, a thug that entered this country illegally 2 years back because of Joe Biden's open border policy, rather. So while Joe Biden wanted to tether George Floyd to his campaign in 2020 and did, Laken Riley is an avatar of the consequences of negligence at the border, and I don't believe voters are going to take that lightly. Her pretty face is all over the internet now, and I think it's going to be on the minds of voters come November.
Every official within the Biden administration who has been asked in a limited number of appearances about Laken Riley and her death has refused to repeat her name when given the opportunity. They've sort of generically referred to the victim's family. For instance, here's Corinne Jean-Pierre on Monday being asked whether or not Biden will even mention Laken Riley, American citizen murdered by an illegal immigrant, this week.
Will President Biden publicly address Laken Riley's murder, allegedly at the hands of an illegal immigrant who was released by law enforcement multiple times on Thursday night? I know he's got a statement, but what about at the State of the Union?
Look, this is such a tragic story and obviously situation. This is someone's life that was lost, so I do want to always acknowledge and extend our deepest condolences to her family and to her friends and the people who loved her. And so want to always be sure to say that, and because it's so tragic. Look, I don't have anything to share about the president's speech as it relates to that particular question that you have. But we want to always be sure that we lift up the families who have lost their loved ones in that way.
Do you get the sense that they are conscientiously not saying her name out loud?
Of course, because the more attention you bring on this, the worse it looks on the Biden administration, because we've seen, according to the new Gallup poll, immigration in the border is the number one concern for voters heading into the election. It's not just Iowa caucus goers or West Virginia Republicans. Immigration is the leading concern. I've argued for a while, if Joe Biden loses this election, it won't be primarily because of his cognitive decline. It will be because of the border and the fear that has bestowed upon everyday Americans. And Laken Riley is now a symbol of what can happen. So of course he doesn't want to mention her name. Vince, I go back to it. When I wrote this column, I spoke to Rachel Campos Duffy, who hosts Fox and Friends on the weekends. She's a mother of 9. And I want to read you this quote because she thinks that this death will have a profound impact when it comes to casting your ballot. She said, Laken Riley's death was a wake-up call to moms across America, especially for us moms with college-age daughters. It's terrifying. And we will be thinking about this beautiful future nurse in our own daughters when we enter the voting booth. Remember the suburban security moms of previous elections? That's the type of impact this death can have, close quote. I think that's such a strong statement and accurate.
Yeah, and it comes at a time where you have, I mean, if you remember back to 2020, the chaos that the left just absolutely injected into our country is still being felt today. And now, and we've got all these headlines out. Democrats are trying to crack down on crime in their own cities. In fact, there was a big piece out of Politico today that basically Dems have decided in an election year to start cracking down on all of this crime. And that's because of real crime that's actually happening, that's really hurting American citizens. And voters are seeing all of this and going, they're having their eyes opened, they're having their families destroyed, and they don't want this, do they?
Absolutely not. And this is the one message that the left is struggling to control, right? Like you and I have talked about it. They control the message on race, transphobia, whatever that is. They don't control the message on immigration, and they're struggling. On Super Tuesday, MSNBC, the esteemed trio of Rachel Maddow, Joy Reid, and Jen Psaki, they laughed off concerns about immigration. I'm sure you saw that video. And Joy Reid interjected saying, Americans are just afraid of brown people invading their country. No, they're not afraid of brown people. They're afraid of what happened to Laken Riley happening to one of their loved ones. So MSNBC can't spin this story, so they're just going to downplay it and laugh it off.
It's so stupid. And also, like, tell that to the black residents of Chicago who are all stepping up to all of these public meetings and saying that the illegal immigration problem is out of control and destroying their city.
And it's such a concern for them, and they know it. But remember, last election, the message behooved them greatly. It was George Floyd, white supremacy, Trump not doing enough with COVID. That's not the case right now. Immigration is top of mind. The economy, crime, Joe Biden's inability to walk and speak properly. None of the messaging is beneficial to that side. And the indictments on Trump and the arrest and removing him from the ballot, that's not helping the left at all. And you look at betting odds, which I follow because they were more accurate in polls in the past two elections. They have Donald Trump as a pretty heavy favorite, and that's justified from my perspective as we sit here today, obviously, with a long way to go.
I'm going to play some audio for you. This is a television commercial put together by a group called Building America's Future, laying the death of Laken Riley at Joe Biden's feet. Take a listen to this.
Laken Riley should have been able to go on a run in broad daylight without being murdered by an illegal immigrant. But Joe Biden promised not to deport illegal immigrants.
Should that person be deported? That person should not be the focus of deportation.
Biden vowed not to detain illegal immigrants who crossed the border.
No one would be put in jail while waiting for their hearing.
So when Jose Ibarra crossed into America illegally, he was not deported. He was not put in jail. Biden also supported sanctuary cities.
Should undocumented immigrants arrested by local police be turned over to immigration officials?
No.
So when Jose Ibarra was arrested in New York City for endangering a child, he was freed a second time. Ibarra went to Georgia, where he beat Laken Riley to death. How many more killers has Biden set free? Building America's Future is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So I expect what's going to happen tonight, Bobby Burack, at the State of the Union, is Joe Biden is going to attempt to pull off the most brazen act of gaslighting anyone's ever seen. And they've already kind of telegraphed that he's going to try and blame Donald Trump for all of this.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. But I go back to what I said originally. This is a matter that just don't believe they're going to be able to spin or capitalize or even mitigate. Say Her Name, which is originally a play off of Breonna Taylor, if I'm not mistaken. It's become a movement. You saw the church during her funeral. People lined up. The mother on Sunday called this tragedy so unavoidable. This is the story that Biden cannot run from. Like, the censorship industrial complex can't suppress this story like they have previous other inconvenient stories for Joe Biden. I think it's going to be a story for a while heading into the election, and one that could sway some on-the-fence voters. And I want to highlight, too, Laken Riley, this is not necessarily an isolated incident. There are a lot of illegals in here, a lot of them dangerous,
yes,
and a lot of people are at jeopardy. So unlike George Floyd, I don't think we need to just focus on one person. this is a broader issue that is worth monitoring, even if the corporate media tries to undermine all of it.
Yeah. By the way, the George Floyd story also has a border connection to it as well. He had fentanyl inside of his body, and much of that was actually produced in Mexico. The cartels have been selling into the United States, although they make more money now out of the human and sex trafficking that they have been doing than they do even the drugs. And all of that is creating chaos in the United States. One last thing on Laken Riley today, Bobby Burack. Yeah. The House has just passed a bill this afternoon that would target illegal immigrants in the United States who have committed additional crimes beyond just being illegally here. They named the legislation after Laken Riley. The bill is called the Laken Riley Act. It passed by a pretty wide margin, 251 to 170. All 170 of the nays, those were Democrats. A bunch of Democrats, some Democrats did cross over to support the legislation today. It was put forward by Congressman Mike Collins, who, by the way, also is going to have an empty seat tonight as his guest on behalf of Laken Riley's family. As this issue is, at the moment at least, definitely not going away.
Yeah, and this is what bothers me about the state of the press and politics. Those Democrats that voted nay, I would love to see them go on cable news and explain why and explain what they would do to combat illegal immigration, or if they consider it even a concern. But they're not going to go on networks that ask them about that. In the networks they do go on, CNN and MSNBC, they're going to avoid it completely. And I think I'd like to hear from those members of Congress why they voted nay and what their solution is, because it's obviously a problem, and all the polls say Americans agree it's the problem.
Yeah, and every single one of those people shouldn't be in Congress. That's the other piece. Bobby Burack, really appreciate your time as always. Thank you very much for your time today and your excellent work for OUTKICK, sir.